"You're nothing but dead weight around here," my son said the evening I came home from knee surgery, when I asked my daughter-in-law to help me up the porch steps. That night, I packed my bag and left the house I had helped them buy. The next morning, I called the bank and removed my name from his restaurant's $180,000 lease guarantee. Then I contacted the dealership and initiated repossession proceedings on the truck I had co-signed 3 years ago. And then I did something that none of us saw coming. Something that changed everything I thought I understood about family, loyalty, and what a man owes to people who have spent years confusing his love for weakness. But let me start at the beginning. The surgery was routine, or so the doctor kept calling it, arthroscopic knee repair, the kind they do on 50 patients a week at St. Mary's Medical Center in Knoxville. I was in and out in 4 hours, hobbling on a rented set of crutches with a bag of ice strapped to my leg and a prescription for anti-inflammatories. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that should have changed anything between a father and his son. But it did. My son Derek had picked me up from the hospital. He sat in the truck with the engine running while the nurse wheeled me out, not bothering to open the passenger door or help me climb in. I managed it myself, folding the crutches and wedging them behind the seat, breathing through the pain that shot up my leg with every movement. Derek stared at his phone the entire drive home. He asked me exactly once if I was comfortable, and when I said the seat position was putting pressure on my knee, he reached over and adjusted it 2 inches, then went back to his phone. I told myself he was tired. I told myself he had a lot on his mind. Derek had been running his restaurant for 3 years, a barbecue place called Ember and Oak out on Chapman Highway, and things had been stressful lately. I understood that. I had been understanding that particular excuse for longer than I could easily remember. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet part of Bearden, the kind of neighborhood where people walk their dogs in the evenings and wave at each other from their driveways. I had contributed $47,000 toward the down payment when Derek and my daughter-in-law Cassandra bought it 6 years ago. At the time, I had called it an investment in their future. I had meant it sincerely, the way I meant most of the financial decisions I had made for them over the years, without conditions, without expecting anything back, except the ordinary warmth that should exist between parents and their children. My daughter-in-law Cassandra met us at the door. She was dressed for going out, not for helping a recovering man up the porch steps. She had her coat on and her keys in her hand, and she looked at me the way you might look at a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. "I didn't know you'd be here this early," she said, directing this at Derek rather than at me. "Surgery was faster than they expected," I said. She nodded the way people nod when they're not actually listening. "I have a thing with Madison and the girls tonight. There's leftover pasta in the fridge." She kissed Derek on the cheek and moved past me down the porch steps without making eye contact. I watched her go. My knee was throbbing. The prescription bag was crumpling in my grip. Inside, Derek set my overnight bag in the hallway and disappeared into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open and close. He reappeared with a beer and sat down in front of the television, pulling up something on the sports channels. I stood in the hallway with my crutches, waiting for him to show me where I would be sleeping, whether the guest room had been cleared out, whether there was anything I needed to know about navigating the house for the next few days. He didn't look up. "Derek," I said, "which room am I in?" "The guest room's full of Cassie's storage stuff. You can take the couch." I looked at the couch. It was a low, deep sectional, the kind of furniture that swallows you when you sit down. Getting up from it with a repaired knee would be somewhere between difficult and genuinely painful. I said so. Derek's jaw tightened. "Then take the floor of the office." "I don't know, Dad. There's not a lot of options here right now." I sat down carefully in the armchair near the window, the one piece of furniture in that room I could get in and out of without help. My knee was sending long, slow pulses of pain up into my hip. I hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. "Could you help me get something to eat?" I asked. "I'm not supposed to be on the leg more than necessary for the first 24 hours. Derek set his beer down with a sound that wasn't quite a slam but wasn't gentle either. He walked to the kitchen, opened the container of pasta, and put it in the microwave. He brought it to me without a bowl, just the takeout container with a fork stabbed into it, and set it on the side table like he was dropping off room service at a hotel where he particularly disliked the guest. He went back to the television. I ate my cold pasta in that armchair and tried to remember the last time I had felt welcome in that house. Over the next 2 days, the atmosphere did not improve. Cassandra came home late and spoke to me in the clipped, carefully polite tones of someone managing a situation they had not agreed to. Derek worked long hours at the restaurant, and when he was home, he moved around me like I was a piece of furniture that had been inexplicably placed in an inconvenient location. Nobody asked how my knee felt. Nobody offered to drive me to the follow-up appointment, which I eventually rescheduled because the logistics of getting there by cab while on crutches felt more exhausting than I could manage alone. On the third evening, I asked Cassandra if she could help me out to the back porch. I wanted fresh air. I had been inside for 3 days, and the walls of that house were beginning to feel like they were pressing inward. She was loading the dishwasher, and she stopped and looked at me with an expression I recognized, the particular look of someone who has been counting their inconveniences and has decided they have been tolerant long enough. "Derek," she called toward the living room. "Your father needs something." Derek appeared in the doorway. He looked at me, then at his wife, then back at me, and something in his face shifted. He had the look of a man who had been having a private conversation that I was not supposed to know about, a conversation in which conclusions had been reached. "Dad," he said, and his voice had a flatness I hadn't heard before, a rehearsed quality, like he had been preparing these words. "We need to talk about the arrangement here." "All right," I said. "This isn't working for us. Having you here. Cassie and I have our routine, and right now everything is kind of disrupted, and it's been a lot. It's been a real strain." I waited. My knee ached. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and whatever Cassandra had made for dinner, something I had not been offered. "You're recovering," Derek continued, "but honestly, you're not easy to have around right now. You need things constantly. You can't really do anything for yourself. You're kind of just—" He stopped. He looked at Cassandra. Something passed between them, some signal I wasn't meant to intercept. He looked back at me. "You're dead weight, Dad. Right now, you're just dead weight around here. And we have a lot going on. And maybe you should start thinking about other options." Dead weight. I had built houses for 37 years. I had framed walls and poured foundations, and worked in the August heat of East Tennessee, with my hands bleeding and my back screaming. And I had done it to take care of my family, to provide the kind of stability I had never had growing up. I had written checks for my son's college, for his first car, for the restaurant's opening costs, when the small business loan hadn't been quite enough, for the down payment on this house where I was now sitting on a borrowed armchair being told I was dead weight. I did not raise my voice. Something in me went very quiet, the way things go quiet before a large structural change. I have been around buildings long enough to know that the loudest moment is never the collapse itself. It's the silence right before it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. I put down the glass of water I had been holding. I took my crutches from where they were leaning against the wall. I walked to the small office where I had been sleeping on a folding cot, and I packed my bag with the unhurried efficiency of a man who has handled difficult logistics before. Clothes, toiletries, the photograph of my late wife Eleanor that I carried with me everywhere, the bottle of pain medication from the hospital bag. I moved slowly because the knee demanded it, but I moved steadily. Derek appeared in the doorway as I was zipping the bag. "Dad, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said. I said it without anger. The way you state a fact about the weather or the time. You meant every word of it. So did Cassandra. I shouldered the bag, tucked the crutches under my arms, and walked past him into the hallway. "I'll let you know where I end up." I called a cab from the porch. The Riverview Inn on Kingston Pike wasn't much, but it was mine. The woman at the front desk asked no questions and carried my bag to roommate herself when she noticed the crutches. The room was clean and smelled faintly of cedar, and the bed was at the right height, and there was a small table by the window where I could sit and watch the evening traffic move along the strip. I ordered a sandwich from the place next door and ate it slowly, and for the first time in 4 days, nobody was inconvenienced by my presence. I slept better than I had in months. Morning came in strips of gold through the blinds. I lay still for a while, watching dust drift in the light, listening to the sounds of the city waking up outside. The knee was stiff, but bearable. My mind was clear in a way that surprised me, not with anger, not with grief, but with a kind of deliberate calm, like a level on a fresh piece of lumber. I thought about the restaurant lease. 3 years ago, Derek had needed a guarantor for the commercial space on Chapman Highway. His credit wasn't strong enough to qualify a loan, and the landlord wanted a co-signer on the $180,000 annual lease with personal guarantee provisions. Derek had asked me, and I had agreed, as I always agreed, because that was what I did. I had signed my name to his future without hesitation. At the time, it had felt like faith. Sitting in that motel room on a Tuesday morning with my repaired knee propped on the extra pillow, it felt like something considerably different. I called Frank. Frank Davenport had been my foreman for the last 11 years of my contracting career. A compact, careful man from Maryville who knew more about building and rebuilding things than anyone I had ever met. He was retired now, too, living in a house he had built himself on the far side of Loudoun County. He answered on the second ring the way he always did, as if he had been expecting the call. "Walter," he said, "haven't heard from you in a while. How's the knee?" "It's getting there," I said. "Frank, I need some advice." "That's what I'm here for." I told him everything. Not in a rush, but carefully, the way I used to walk a new client through a project, making sure they understood what they were looking at before they signed anything. Frank listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Riverview Inn, on Kingston Pike." "Stay there. I'll be there in 40 minutes. We'll get coffee and figure out what you actually want to do." He was there in 35. We sat at the small diner 2 blocks from the motel, a place called Lena's that had been there since the 1980s and still made biscuits from scratch. Frank wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at me the way a good foreman looks at a wall he's trying to figure out, not with judgment, just with assessment. "So what are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking it's time I stopped building other people's houses and started living in my own," I said. "And I'm thinking I need to do it properly, all the way. No halfway measures." Frank nodded slowly. "The guarantee on the restaurant lease. You know what happens if you withdraw. Derek loses the space unless he can find another guarantor or refinance. He's been behind on the rent twice in the last year. The landlord's already nervous." I paused. "I know what it means. I've thought about it." "And the truck?" 2 years ago, I had co-signed a $58,000 truck loan for Derek when his credit score was too low to qualify at a reasonable rate. My name was on that note as co-borrower. "I've been making half the payments without him knowing," I said. "For 18 months. He thinks the full amount comes out of his account. It doesn't." Frank set down his coffee. "You're serious?" "I've been subsidizing his life in ways he doesn't even know about," I said. "That stops this week." I made the calls that afternoon. The bank first, to speak with someone in the commercial lending division about my obligations as guarantor on the lease. The account manager was a young woman named Patricia who walked me through the process with professional efficiency and almost no expression of surprise. She had clearly handled similar situations before. The process would take several days to formalize, she explained. Derek would be notified. The landlord would be notified. I would need to sign a formal withdrawal document. "Will this cause immediate problems for the business?" she asked, because she was required to ask. "That's up to my son," I said. The auto lender was more complicated, but the loan officer I spoke with eventually confirmed that I could request to be released from the co-borrower obligation given certain conditions, the most relevant being that payments had been irregular, which they had. On Derek's end, I had been covering the gaps without him knowing. I sat on the edge of the motel bed afterward and looked at my hands for a while. Builder's hands, marked by decades of work, calloused at the palm and strong at the knuckle. I thought about Eleanor, who had died 7 years ago from a cancer that moved faster than any of us had been prepared for. I thought about how she had worried, in her last months, about what would happen to me after she was gone, whether I would be taken care of, whether the people who were supposed to love me would show up when it mattered. I thought about what she would say if she could see the room I was sitting in and why I was in it. I thought she would probably say, "It's about time." The following morning I called my attorney. Douglas Fairweather had handled my estate planning for 15 years. A methodical man in his late 60s who had also been a client of mine once, back when I had renovated the building that housed his office. We had a relationship built on mutual respect and the shared understanding that a well-built foundation matters more than almost anything else. "I want to rewrite the will," I told him, sitting across his desk in an office that still had the crown molding I had installed in 2004. "Completely." He folded his hands. "How completely?" "Derek gets nothing. Cassandra gets nothing. I want the estate to go to a fund for veterans in need of housing assistance, administered through the East Tennessee Veterans Coalition. They help veterans who are aging out of support systems and need stable places to live, people who need dignity restored. Fairweather studied me over his reading glasses. That's a significant change, Walter. I know what it is. The estate is currently valued at just over $400,000, including the retirement accounts and the property in Sevierville. I know what it's worth, I said. I know exactly what it's worth because I built it, every dollar of it, and I get to decide where it goes. He nodded once, with the particular respect a careful man gives to another careful man. I'll draw up the new documents. We can have them ready for signature by Friday. Walking out of that office into the October sunshine of downtown Knoxville, I felt the specific lightness that comes when you set down something heavy you have been carrying for so long you forgot what your hands felt like without it. A street musician near the corner was playing something slow and deliberate on a guitar, a sound that matched the mood of the morning. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let it wash over me. My phone began to ring. Derek's name on the screen. I had been expecting this. The bank would have sent notification, or the landlord had called him, or both. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. Dad. His voice was at a pitch I hadn't heard since he was 17 and had backed my truck into a fence post. What did you do? Good morning, son. The bank called me. They said my lease guarantee is being withdrawn. Stan Hadley from the landlord's office called me 15 minutes later. Do you have any idea what this does to Ember and Oak? We're in the middle of renegotiating the lease terms. If you pull out as guarantor right now, the whole thing could collapse. I started walking back toward the motel. The October air was cool and clear, the kind of Tennessee fall day that makes you feel like everything could start over. I understand that. You understand. Dad, this is my livelihood. This is everything I've built. I stopped at the corner and waited for the light. A woman across the street was lifting a stroller up a curb with calm, practiced efficiency, moving forward without drama. I've been building things my entire life, I said. I know what it looks like when a foundation isn't right. When you build on a foundation that isn't right, eventually you have to come back and fix it properly. It costs more time, more money, more everything. But it has to be done. This isn't some construction metaphor. This is my restaurant. It's also the restaurant I co-signed a lease for, that I've been partially guaranteeing with my personal assets for 3 years. Those personal assets belong to a man you called dead weight. Silence. A long one. The light changed and I crossed the street slowly, watching my footwork on the curb. I didn't mean that, he said. His voice had dropped. You meant it enough to say it to my face in front of your wife after keeping me on a folding cot in your office for 3 days and not once asking if I needed anything. I kept my voice level. Not cold, not heated, just honest. You know what I was doing while you were at the restaurant last Tuesday? Was calling a cab to take myself to the pharmacy because no one offered to help. And then I sat in the back of that cab with my leg elevated on the divider because the driver felt sorry for me and offered. And I thought about every single thing I've done for you and Cassandra over the years. The down payment, the restaurant, the truck, the times I've covered rent when you were short, the times I've shown up without being asked. I thought about all of it. Dad. And I decided that a man who does all of that for his child, and who gets called dead weight when he needs help getting up 3 porch steps, that man has been making a very serious mistake for a very long time. And I decided to stop making it. Another silence. When Derek spoke again, his voice had the quality of someone who is beginning to understand the dimensions of what they are standing in. What do you want me to say? I don't want you to say anything right now, I said. I think we've both said enough. I'll have my attorney contact you about the formal changes to the will. You'll receive documentation about the guarantee withdrawal from the bank. I'd suggest calling Stan Hadley before end of day and being honest with him about the situation. He's a reasonable man. The will, Derek said. What does that mean? It means what it sounds like. You and Cassandra will receive notification from Douglas Fairweather's office. I'd recommend you read it carefully. I ended the call and stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside Lena's diner. Through the window I could see Frank, who had come to meet me for lunch and was already seated with his coffee, reading the newspaper with the unhurried ease of a man at peace with his day. I pushed open the door. Frank looked up and assessed me the way he had assessed job sites for 40 years, quickly, accurately, without sentiment. Well, he said, You look like a man who made some phone calls. I made some phone calls. Sit down. I ordered you the beef stew. I sat. The diner was warm and full of the sounds of ordinary Tuesday lunch, clinking silverware and low conversations, and a radio somewhere in the kitchen playing classic country at a volume just below distinct. A family at the table next to us was celebrating something, a birthday from the look of the small cake a waitress was carrying over. The little girl at the center of it was maybe 6, wide-eyed and solemn with the weight of the moment. Frank poured me coffee without being asked. You okay? I think I am, I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't meant much of anything in a long time. Halfway through the stew, my phone rang again. This time, it was Cassandra. Frank raised an eyebrow. I looked at the phone, then I set it in the center of the table, screen up, and switched it to speaker. Frank leaned back slightly, not moving away, just giving me room to handle what was coming. Cassandra? I said. Walter. She never called me Dad, not in 6 years of marriage to my son. It had always been Walter, in the tone of someone who has decided the relationship does not require warmth. Derek just called me. He told me what you're doing? I think it's important that we talk about this like adults. We can do that, I said. This vendetta you seem to be carrying out over a conversation that was, at most, poorly worded, is going to have real consequences for real people. Derek's employees, the people who depend on that restaurant. Are you really willing to hurt all of them because you're upset about one thing? Derek said. I've been thinking about that, I said. And what I keep coming back to is that Derek has had 3 years to build a business that could stand on its own. And he hasn't done that, because he's never had to. Because whenever there's been a gap, I've filled it. If the restaurant is in a position where one guarantor withdrawal threatens the whole thing, that's not my failure. That's 3 years of choices that weren't mine. A short pause. You're punishing your own son. I'm making a decision about my own financial commitments. Those are 2 different things. The diner sounds continued around us, unhurried and indifferent. I'm also, for the record, making a decision about where I want to spend the rest of my life, and who I want to spend it with, and what I want to do with what I've built. What is that supposed to mean? It means that the man who needed help up 3 porch steps is also the man who built a $400,000 estate from nothing, and that man has decided his estate should go somewhere it will actually help people. People who are alone and need dignity and a decent place to live. Not people who have a perfectly good house and a restaurant and a truck, and have decided that the man who helped provide all of those things is dead weight. There was a sound on the other end of the line that I couldn't quite identify. I thought for a moment it might be crying, but when Cassandra spoke again, her voice was steady and cold. You'll regret this. I've been regretting the wrong things for 20 years, I said. I thought it was time to change that. I ended the call. The diner had gone quiet. I looked up. The family with the birthday cake was watching. The couple by the window was watching. The waitress who had been refilling water glasses had stopped with the pitcher halfway to a table. A man at the counter in a contractor's jacket, the kind with the company logo on the chest, was looking at me with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself a few times in my life, the expression of a person who has just witnessed something true. The man in the contractor's jacket raised his coffee mug in a small, deliberate salute. Then the waitress started clapping. It was quiet at first, just her. Then the couple by the window joined in. Then the family with the birthday cake, the little girl clapping with particular enthusiasm, though she clearly had no idea what she was applauding. The man at the counter set down his coffee and added his hands to it, and the sound filled the warm space of Lena's diner on Kingston Pike on an ordinary Tuesday in October, until it became something I hadn't expected to feel that day, or perhaps in a long time. Frank was smiling, not the small, careful smile he usually kept, but a wide, real one that rearranged his whole face. I've been your foreman for 11 years, he said, as the applause settled back into the normal sounds of lunch. And that is the best thing I have ever watched you build. The weeks that followed had the quality of a house that has finally been properly leveled. Quiet, solid, a little unfamiliar because you've been living on a slant for so long. I found an apartment on the 2nd floor of a converted building near 4th and Gill, a neighborhood of old craftsman houses and young trees and people who walked places on purpose. The apartment had high windows and good light and a kitchen I could actually cook in, and a front room where I set up Eleanor's photograph on the mantel where I could see it from anywhere in the space. The rent was my own business. The utilities were my own business. The leftovers in the refrigerator were mine, and nobody needed to know about them. My knee healed properly, the way things heal when you're not spending your energy managing other people's emergencies. I went to physical therapy twice a week and walked along the river trail the other days, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, learning to trust the repaired joint, the way you learn to trust a new section of framing after you've reinforced it correctly. Derek called twice more in the first week, both times with a different tone than the one I'd heard at the diner. Less anger, more calculation. He wanted to know if there was something he could do, something he could say, some arrangement that could be reached. I told him the same thing both times. I hoped the restaurant found its footing. I wished him well, and I was no longer in a position to be the footing. After the second call, I didn't hear from him again. I wasn't sure yet what that meant, or what it would eventually become. I wasn't in a hurry to figure it out. Frank came over on a Saturday in late November, and we spent the afternoon on the front stoop drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood go past. He told me about a trout stream out near Greeneville that nobody fished anymore because the access road was rough. And I told him I'd been thinking about driving out to see my brother in Asheville, something I had been putting off for 3 years because there was always something more pressing on Derek's end that needed my attention. "Call him," Frank said. "I was thinking next weekend," I said. "Call him now. I'll wait." I called my brother Robert from the front stoop while Frank watched the street with quiet satisfaction. Robert answered on the first ring and said he had been wondering when I was going to stop making excuses. And we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, about the old neighborhood and fishing and the way the light looks on the Blue Ridge in winter, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still clenched. I booked the drive to Asheville for the following Friday. And one evening in early December, sitting at the table by my window with a glass of bourbon and a road atlas I had found at a used bookstore down the street, I opened to the page showing the western states, and I traced a line with my finger from Tennessee all the way to the coast, through places I had been meaning to get to for 30 years and never had, because there was always someone else's house to finish before my own. The atlas page crinkled softly under my hand. Outside, the street was quiet. Just the occasional headlight sweeping across the wall, the distant sound of someone's wind chimes in the evening air. The apartment was warm and exactly the size I needed it to be. Eleanor's photograph watched from the mantel with the expression she always had in photographs, calm and slightly amused, as if she knew something about the future that the camera had accidentally caught. I picked up the phone and found the number for a travel agency I had bookmarked weeks ago. It was still early enough to call. Before we continue, if this story moved something in you, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below letting us know where you're listening from. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.